Jamie. So before we start, I would like to acknowledge that this event is being held on the traditional land of the Nyungar people. So good evening, everyone. Right, it gives me a great pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome to our ECU Business Flashlight tonight. So we have had this event for 2 years now. So it's basically a very actually exciting event. Right? I was particularly pleased to know that many in the room this evening are ECU alumni. Thank you all for coming. The School of Business and Law at ECU is committed to research and educational excellence. We focus on our research to be innovative, applied, and have end-user impact. Academics in the school are involved in the research relating to a wide range of area across business and law. We got 3 active research centers with also multidisciplinary areas. One of the research centers is the Center for Work and Organizational Performance. We call it CWOP, correct, Steve? CWOP, right? Headed by Professor Stephen Thier. And the topic for this evening has come out of the research from this center. As part of our commitment to research engagement, it is important to our future research endeavor that research successes and findings are communicated and shared with the industry, government, and the community. This event is one of the many ways for us to engage in collaborative dialogue and discuss issues of mutual interest with our speakers and participants. It is pleasing to note that the agenda of tonight's forum covers an important topic on how our workplaces are changing into the future, how situational factors and human behavior can impact us, those we work with, and those we work for, and also what are the psychological risks, consequences, and chances are needed as we look toward the future of work. And now I would like to introduce our Executive Dean of the School of Business and Law, Professor Mariam Omari, to formally open the event.
Thanks for that, Hadrian. Can I start by thanking all of you for being here? As Hadrian said, quite a few of you are alumni, and it's great to see you associate with us going forward. I'd like to thank Hadrian as our Associate Dean Research and Jamie as our High Degrees Research Coordinator and all of the staff in the Research Office. Can you put your hand up so everybody can see what a marvellous job you've done for the organisation of this event? It's our 3rd one this year, and we've got quite a few organised for next year, all with distinguished speakers. Our previous event had the Minister for Tourism, and our next event is going to have, am I announcing things prematurely?
That's fine.
A Harvard professor who was the Nobel Prize winner for economics in 2016. So exciting times, and we'll let you know about all of that. I'm not going to talk much. I've got the great privilege of calling all 3 speakers tonight personal friends. I've known each of them for quite a while in different capacities. And I'm just going to make a very quick introduction of each of them, and then I'll get off the stage so you can hear the main events. Now, Hadrian, you've introduced the Centre for Work and Organisational Performance, so I might leave it to Stephen if he wants to elaborate a bit further when we get to your presentation. I'm going to introduce Tim and then hand over to him. So I actually met Tim in 2014 when we were both at and Stephen was there too actually, at the International Association on Workplace Bullying and Harassment Conference in Milan, which was an amazing conference. And Stephen and Tim were there to actually win the next conference in Auckland. It's an amazing conference that happens every 2 years, and next year I think we're all going to be in Bordeaux, which will be lovely. So our areas of research come together, but just a little bit about Pearl. Again, I had the great pleasure of working with Pearl in a professional capacity as well. We actually met at ECU at an event that I'd organised 4 or 5 years ago. Pearl, amongst the many things that she does, and you'll hear about her background, is the chair of Connect Groups. Connect Groups is the peak body for self-help and support groups in WA. And Pearl asked me to join the board, and it was an amazing experience, so I thank you for that, and she's still continuing in that capacity. So, very quickly about Tim. He's currently, actually he's here from New Zealand, so he's 5 hours ahead of us, but he's looking pretty good at the moment. Tim's currently the Professor of Work and Organisation and the Director of Research at Massey University School of Management. He founded the Healthy Work Group and is also the former director of the New Zealand Work Research Institute. His research is focused on workplace bullying, occupational health and safety, and the future of work, which he will be speaking on today. He's very well published and frequently cited author and often featured in, and he's on the media quite often, so you should be okay with a recording tonight, hopefully. He's currently leading the development of the New Zealand Workplace Barometer, a national research project. So can you please join me in welcoming Tim to the stage?
Thank you to lovely Dean for inviting me as well and looking after me so beautifully the last few days. It's been a pleasure. Can you all hear me okay? A bit further from the mic, but anyway. So we're going to talk about this subject of promoting healthy work, which is my great passion. I know the other speakers share it with me because workplaces should be good places where you can come home, at least in as good state as when you left for work in the morning, and that's not always the case. And often that's the difference between how we perform, our well-being, how healthy we are, and how well the organisation does. So it's incredibly important. And then as we look to the future, things are beginning to change, and as people from industry you will be aware of that, and it's probably a time when you're all starting to think about, and hopefully have already been thinking about, how do we best prepare ourselves for the future of work. So I'm trying to combine these two issues into one tool, two of my current sort of passions in research into one tool. So Stephen's going to talk a bit later about some of the harder data, some of the research we've actually done. I'm going to give a bit more of a general introduction to the subject. Marian's already mentioned this, so I won't linger on it, but I founded the Healthy Work Group, and that's a group of researchers interested in things like, reducing workplace stress, creating a good psychosocial work environment, and eliminating problems like bullying and so on, as far as we can. And our tool, the Workplace Barometer, is a way of sort of assessing that both across nationally, so we can provide data for the government on the extent of psychosocial risks, but also within organisations to help them understand the risks that they face and how best to manage those hazards that can lead to wellbeing concerns, mental health problems, stress, anxiety, and so on. So it's very much, our work is very much focused around the organisation rather than necessarily focusing on the interpersonal and the individual level. Others do that and do it very well. So we're, being part of a business school, we're more focused on the organisational level and how to create that environment for healthy and productive work. So the future of work and healthy work, well, this is the problem in essence. There are changes are coming and have already started to come. We're changing how our organisations look, how we work. The workforce is changing and so on. I'll talk a bit about that in a sec. But with that come increasing psychosocial risks. So organisations, as we know, tend to often focus on managing physical risks. And in fact, a lot of the information we get from government and others is around how we manage those physical risks in our organisation, basically our health and safety, but not so much on the psychological hazards and our psychological health and safety. So understanding that better from a sort of organisational view and how we can promote healthy work where people's both their wellbeing and their performance are promoted through things we can do through the design of work, the design of people's jobs and how they actually go about their tasks is really important. So, and it's often overlooked by the authorities and by organisations who struggle to manage these. So this is why this is our focus. And of course we know a poor psychosocial environment creates considerable problems both for the organisation and the individual in terms of their well-being, but also their performance, their engagement with work, their retention. It's very hard, can be very hard to attract to an organisation that has a reputation for having a very unhealthy work environment. You may well experience this or found it in yourself when you're looking for a job that places quickly develop reputations where there's constant, unregulated, poorly managed change and this sort of thing that creates these risks. So, and when there's a lot of stress around and disorganisation of work. Needless to say, if we don't manage our work environment well, it's very hard to create a healthy work environment and to have good productivity and there's wellbeing impact and so on. So what's psychosocial risk? Well, it's those parts of the work that aren't, as I say, physical hazards and risks, but they're the psychological ones that come around through the design of work, through the organisation of work. They often involve a level of disorganisation. You get things like poorly managed workloads, unreasonable deadlines, constant work pressure, and so on, and sort of overload and intensification of work without awareness of people's need to balance their work activity and their rest and have meaningful work and those sorts of things. So it's part of the tradition, or those of us that are sort of teach and study in the organisational behaviour area and so on, a lot of what we teach is how to actually design work and jobs well, so that people are productive, they're motivated, but also they're healthy and that. So that's kind of what this relates to. So it includes the design of jobs, the organisation of work, and if you, as I was saying, if you've been in a poorly organised workplace, you'll know that it can be extremely stressful. A workplace that otherwise should have been free of stress because there's nothing intrinsically stressful about the work becomes stressful because the leadership or the management is poor, the manager has poor competencies, there's too much pressure, not enough resources, limited autonomy and control, all those sorts of things, overburdening bureaucracy and all the things that many of us face, particularly working in the public sector. These all, and relational factors, which is the thing that I've got in common with my other speakers today, around things like managing conflict, and particularly, and it's really has risen as a big issue in Australia and New Zealand, is workplace bullying, and how this is one of the things that arises from a work environment rather than just an interpersonal issue. It's often underlying work environment issues that lead to these things. And so organisations with a poor psychosocial environment tend to have high levels of stress, bullying, lower levels of retention and engagement. And of course, this is bad for the organisation and bad for the individual. So, and the situation is perhaps slightly advanced in Australia, but in New Zealand we really don't have a good handle on what is the extent of the psychosocial risks and what are the outcomes, how are they affecting these things like mental health and so on. So that's what the New Zealand Workplace Barometer is about. The future of work. So we know that the changes in the nature of work will... I've gone back one. Sorry, apologies. Yeah. So the trends influencing work. So you've all heard these trends about advanced technology and changing demographics and environmental pressures and new ways that we interact socially through social media and so on. New ways of working, particularly, and I know it's a big movement in New Zealand and Australia around much more flexible working. More and more employees now can ask to work flexibly. That can include working from home and teleworking. It can include flexible hours and all sorts of things. And these create new sort. While they have many benefits, they can also create new psychological risks. But broadly speaking, in terms of the changing these forces and the effect they have on the work environment, we talk in terms of the future organisation, the future workforce, and the future ways of working. So the future organisation, obviously organisations are going to need to restructure, perhaps get more flatter, behave more like small organisations in order to be able to innovate, to be able to keep in touch and be responsive and so on. And so there will be structural changes, but also we'll have more and more people who will be freelancers, will be contractors rather than having the luxury, I guess, of a permanent role that many of us have, tenure and so on. And with that brings new psychosocial risk and many other issues. The workforce, we know, is increasingly freelance, agile, flexible, insecure, mobile and old. And so we need to think about how you manage a workforce that is ageing, particularly in some industries, and I don't know if anyone here is represented in those industries where the demographic across the industry means that you risk an awful lot of people retiring and difficulty replacing those skills as those people go out from the baby boomer generation, my generation basically, as we begin to retire. In our country, we're told next year is the year it will really hit and we'll start to notice, and some industries will be really badly hit. And I just don't see enough evidence of organisations doing enough at this point in terms of having age programs and so on and age-friendly policies and thinking about how best to engage and retain older workers. And some of the work Stephen and I have done has looked at that, and he's going to mention some of that in a bit, I think. And so on. So these are some of the forces, and these will create risks and new risks that we haven't had before. So hence this diagram. Now, we'll need to use my pointer now. So these are some of these future workforces that I mentioned. So obviously we've got increasing globalisation, more and more people working on overseas assignments, but also more and more immigrant labour and teams of multinational type. We've got new organisational forms that I mentioned. We've got these new ways of working. We've got casualisation of work. We've got growing service sector. Many jobs. Certainly, we're going to have a much larger, effectively working poor, and we'll have a lot of people in those insecure roles. Even freelancers. We'll have questions about how we retain these people, how we engage them when they don't actually, they're not actually employees, let alone the sort of psychosocial problems that come with that. We got demographic shifts, as I was mentioning. We got 5 generations working together now. We got greater workforce diversity. We got the whole issue about automation, robots, and so on, and how what that means for jobs, and I'll mention a bit of that in a minute. And then we got, one of the many things about individual employees is they're going to have multiple careers. They're going to have to constantly upskill. They're going to have to, be able to be agile and adapt to different forms of work, because we don't know what sorts of work are out there. And I think that's one of the roles of the business school, is to be able to create graduates that are world ready, as ECU's business school does, and also future ready to be effective leaders and workers in the future. But these things together, and if I just take a couple, so if we take, for instance, new ways of working, just to give an example of the risks these give rise to, and so some of this will be around changing interpersonal relationships, work-family conflict, as more and more people work remotely, and that's a big trend. We've done some fairly big studies in New Zealand and some in Australia too that show, really increasing trends of people working from home, and a lot of that is good, as long as there's not too much of it, a balance between working at home, working at work, and working in perhaps a digital hub or a smart centre, something like that is a pretty good mix. It enables people to have less commute, but it also removes you from the social support. So I think I've got social support here. So social isolation, reduced support, lack of personal development. Often these people, like temporary workers, miss out on training and development and so on. Same with casualisation of work. Obviously a lot of insecurity that comes with that gives rise to these things, stress and anxiety, depression and mental health and so on. So as these things grow, we will see more and more psychosocial risks leading to these negative outcomes. Reduced meaning in work, as people, tend to be in less skilled roles, and we have this big split between those with the skills and the agility to be able to do well in the future work, and those that simply are competing for low-paid, poor working condition type roles. And so these are the things that we've found in our research and others have found, including here in Australia with the Australian Workplace Barometer, which is a similar approach to ours, that where you have a poor psychosocial safety climate and poorly managed workplaces, you end up having greater costs through absenteeism. The individual obviously has more mental health problems and so on. So it really does emphasise the need to manage these. So what I want to quickly do in the last couple of minutes available to me, if they're generous, is just mention some of the ways that we look at it. Obviously there's various ways to look at what healthy work is, and the WHO, the World Health Organisation, has their own ideas, and we've taken some of their ideas. Other organisations like the EU, OSHA and others also have them. These are some of the ones that we include, and if I just quickly mention some, that together create healthy work. One is obviously top leadership commitment. You're not going anywhere in terms of your culture and so on if you don't have commitment at the top. So a lot of it is convincing. I know there's some very senior people here, convincing very senior people that there is actually it's actually a win-win thing to create a healthy work environment in terms of retaining the much valued talent, engaging our staff, increasing performance, which is another thing that's been shown to do, and obviously reducing those risks and meeting our, what we must do in terms of providing a safe place of work. Management competencies is a real big thing. We could talk about that a lot, but I don't have time. But obviously, if managers have good competencies, they can manage people well. We're not just promoting people on their technical and clinical skills. That's a really good thing. If we start to make sure that people have the right sort of empathy, they know how to support people, they're good dealing with relationship issues and so on, and they can organise the work well, that will deal with an awful lot of the problems we see in the workplace. Employee involvement, often employee involvement, particularly in health and safety and those things, goes out the window, particularly with temporary workers, part-time workers, those sorts of things. We must really keep this in mind, as all the research shows that you must have that. Obviously a culture of respect and fairness. I'll just mention one or two of these things. Managing interpersonal relationships, this is obviously one of my big things about how you create an environment where everyone feels that they are treated with respect and dignity. Everyone knows where the line is between what's acceptable and what isn't. I think establishing that, so if you haven't got a handle on that and don't have good policies, that's something to really focus on. Meaningful work content, this is really about job design. People aren't going to be engaged, motivated and retained if you don't provide, you don't let them have input into their job design, and you don't design their roles thoughtfully to ensure they are engaged. This good balance of effort and rest, we have this 24/7 society we're moving in, we're already in, we all use our mobile devices all the time. It's about, yes, there's the personal discipline aspect of when you turn them off, but many of us are in roles where you don't feel that you can enough, and so we're the blurry boundaries between what work and what isn't. I think we're actually moving into a world where the 9 to 5 work day is almost outmoded. So we do need to be disciplined. That's okay because that gives us flexibility, but we do need to maintain that. And organisations also need to be mindful about that. And then this good work-life balance is always must be there. And of course, as more and more people working remotely, we need to be really mindful of how we achieve that. So these are some of the things together that create healthy work. So Stephen's going to come up next and talk about some of the specific things that we've looked at together and that Work His Centre's been doing. So over to you, Steve-O. Is someone going to... You're going to get it in.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, Professor Stephen Teo. Now, when I first met Stephen, I was pleased to find out that he's a fellow Malaysian after he introduced himself as a Penang boy. Now, that means that he's a proud food lover. Now, Stephen joined ECU as a professorial research fellow. At our school, he is the professor of work performance. He tells everyone that his key focus is happiness at work. So in the past year, I've come to call him Professor Happy. Since joining this year, Stephen has established the Centre for Work and Organisational Performance, or what we call CWOP. He has also recently taken on the role of Associate Dean for the Management Discipline. He's a people person, someone that you will enjoy working with and working for. He often describes himself as a global citizen, having lived and worked in Malaysia, Australia, Hong Kong, and New Zealand. He studied in Monash in Swinburne before obtaining his PhD from Queensland University of Technology. Stephen is an expert scholar in the field of human resource management, organizational change, and public management. His focuses on how change affects the well-being and performance of public sector employees. So his research he's done some industry projects as well in Australia, New Zealand, in US, and the UK. Please join me in welcoming the effervescent Stephen Teo.
Thank you. There's no high expectations. I think I like to call myself Professor of Happiness. I think happiness is pretty important, it's generous. So as Hadrian was saying, I've just formed a new research center at ECU. Forgive me if I'm shouting. My hearing is not that good today, so I should have put on my hearing aid. No, I have a ear infection, so I'm listening from one ear. So I can't tell how loud am I speaking today. So my center is on Center for Work and Organizational Performance, and we basically do work on human resource management and work, organizational studies, and change management. Some of those things that Tim talked about earlier in his presentation, where he talked about the psychosocial dimension of work, that's some of the specialization that we do in the research center, and we aim to co-create knowledge with industry. Anyway, so that's the blurb for the center. Not sure whether that's good marketing. Anyway, so let's see how can we get happy in this context of future and work. Let's see whether I can do this. I don't do technology very well. It's a joke. Future work, technology. Thanks. She smiled. That's good. One person got my joke. So I'm just going to follow on with what Tim was talking earlier. What are the challenges of future of work, and and how that impact on what we do at work, our individual well-being, and how we bring that home to our family, our loved ones. And finally, as employers, we're actually interested in terms of how can your work and your well-being contribute to organizational performance. So to do that, I'm going to talk about two projects that Tim, myself, and a few other colleagues have done. We're going to look at aging workforce in New Zealand in the context of future of work, because that's one of the challenges of changing demographic in the future of work is our aging workforce. And then we're also going to talk about teleworking. Teleworking is important because employees are expected to be more flexible, working from home. So we'll look at what are some of the challenges of teleworking in New Zealand. I put Australia in there because thinking that I might have time to talk about the Australian data set, but I ran out of time. Having too many different roles at ECU, a bit of a job demand.
Which you love.
Which I love, yeah, sorry, I forgot to say that too. Okay, so that's a psychosocial dimension of work. So lastly, I'm going to talk about what are the health and well-being implications of future of work in relation to aging workforce and teleworking. I think some of my colleagues in the room have listened to my presentation 2 weeks ago at ECU, where I started off with a very doom and gloom, looking at workplace bullying and how that impact on your well-being. So today I'm moving away from that. So I'll let Tim. I think Tim sort of talk about the dark side of well-being. So I'm going to focus a bit more on the happiness, a bit more upbeat, given that it's a Thursday night. It's Thursday, isn't it? Yes. Sorry, I'm losing track of time as well. So what's this phenomenon of aging workforce, and how is that connected to future of work? There was a recent report done by University of Melbourne researchers, where they look at the data on the future of work, and the UN estimated that by 2050, 1 in 3 people living in the developed world will be over 60 years old, and in Australia, 1 in 4 people is older than 55. And over that next decade, this will approximately increase to about 1 in 3. So the challenge is, as employers, as managers, as supervisors, what are we going to do with this sort of changes to our demographic population? How do we prolong paid workers in the workforce, especially as people are retiring later in life and tend to work longer? Myself, I'm definitely working till I'm 75. So
That's good to know.
Yeah, so that's quite scary. When a few years ago, I never thought that I will be researching into aging workforce, and suddenly because of Tim, now I've been dragged into this aging workforce situation that is quite confronting. So I'm trying to deal with aging in a very positive way. So what are some of the challenges of aging workforce? Obviously, you know, it's the cost of healthcare and impacts on the social welfare system, retirement savings, and also the broader economy. And the research that we see out there, they tend to look at aging workforce from quite a negative perspective, looking at age discrimination. That's what we tend to see, stereotypes where older workers are slow, they can't use technology, they're quite hard to train, and they're not motivated. All they want to do is to sit somewhere and lie down and have a snooze. So the question is, for us, Tim, myself, and a few other colleagues, so what do older workers think about their experience and well-being at work? Okay, so we're not asking the younger people about them, but we go out to the 45 and older and ask them to tell us what they think about their work experience and well-being. So this is what we found, or this is the sample characteristics. So the research was sponsored by EEO Trust in New Zealand. So now they're called Diversity Works New Zealand. We used an online survey sent to a staff aged 55 years and over. Altogether, we had about 1,300 respondents from 28 organizations in New Zealand of varying size, type, and sector. And a majority were female, as you can see, 67%. And half of the respondents were aged between 55 to 59, with the remainder of the sample being 60 years or older. So we're definitely talking about people, the baby boomers, and who are still at work. So these are the people who are still employed, actively working in New Zealand. So for those of you who know me, I can't talk without data. I love my data, so this is my data. So using, Tim was saying, social exchange theory, and that is looking at your relationship at work, your relationship with your colleagues, your relationship with the supervisors. We want to see how does that then impact on the job engagement of older workers, and whether age discrimination play a part in that relationship, and whether that would make them wanting to quit their job and leave work to take on early retirement. So this is what we found. We found gender having an effect on job engagement. So the women were more engaged at work, the older women. And we also found that the job roles have an impact on job engagement and intention to quit, in such that people who are more senior in their roles, they are very engaged, and people who are lesser in their job roles, they are more likely to want to quit job, which is quite logical in a sense, right? The people who are not at the higher end of the totem pole, they want to quit their job sooner than those who are more senior. So then we look at what are the different antecedents to that intention to quit here. So two things that we proposed. One was positive organizational support. That was what Tim was talking about earlier, the psychosocial dimension of work, looking at how does the organization create a positive work environment to support you as an employee. And we also look at the quality of relationship between the supervisors and the employees. So those two dimensions we found both increase job engagement. So that means any healthy workplace, if you want your employees to be engaged in their job, you have to create a positive work environment. And secondly, you want to make sure that your boss and yourself are mates. Okay, my boss and I were mates, so good, I'm happy. So I'm engaged in my job. Then now, to what extent would those two things, the two happy things, impact on the perception of you, the older workers, being discriminated at work? The dotted line here means that there's no effect. So your relationship, your quality relationship with your boss / supervisor has no impact on your perception of you being discriminated at work. On the other hand, a positive workplace culture support has a negative relationship with job discrimination. So the more positive the workplace culture, the lesser you would feel that you're being discriminated at work for the older people. Okay? And then finally, we found that age discrimination, the more you have that, the more likely you want to quit your job. On the other hand, job engagement is the one that pull you in and make you less wanting to quit. So we published that in 2015, and so that was quite interesting. And so what dimension is basically, if you want people to stay on, the older people, we want them to be engaged, focus on creating positive organizational support and having a quality relationship between employees and the supervisor, because that's the one that's going to tie you to your workplace, that make you more engaged. On the other hand, quality relationship doesn't make you feel that you've been excluded in the workplace. It's positive support that's going to make you feel that you're part of the workplace. Okay, it's that whole idea of Tim was saying, respect, inclusivity, and all that positive dimension of work. So how am I going with time? Where is Uma? Where are you hiding, Uma? 3 minutes, good. I'm doing well. So the second study we're going to talk about is telework. So what is telework? Telework in the literature has been known, defined by a number of things. It's telecommuting, remote working, agile working, as Tim was saying earlier, and working anywhere. So Mariam is definitely working anywhere. You get emails from her, and when she is in a meeting. Oh no, she doesn't do that. She doesn't send emails when she's in meetings. Sorry, I didn't say that. So in this 21st century of work, where everything is happening in front of us, where we have a wonderful iPhone and things where you can send messages, the work is not confined to your desk in your workplace. It actually happens somewhere else. So typically it occurs at home. It occurs at home, but it can also occur on the road. I'm not encouraging people to text and drive.
What you were doing today.
I didn't do that. So you can go to another colleague of mine talk about Smart Center. So if you go to ECU, I think the TAFE over there, they have a Smart Center where people co-working in a common space. So that's also a form of a digital work hub. So then in this idea of future work, then the question here is, to what extent when people work from home, not in the workplace where you are socializing with your boss and your colleagues, to what extent does social isolation impact on your well-being? So here we're trying to understand, would social isolation have an impact on telework? Because we are trying to understand well-being, and in this case, we're looking at psychological strength, psychological well-being, and happiness. As I said, I'm a professor of happiness, so this is about how job satisfaction is an indicator of happiness at work. So hopefully, we'll be able to show that social support is going to give you psychological well-being and reduce your stress that leads to your happiness at work. So that's our proposed hypotheses that we want to test. So again, it's got data, and the theory here is we use a social technical systems theory that Tim is an expert of. And so here's a few variables. We look at support for employees to undertake telework. We look at positive organizational support. So that's the same variable as I was saying earlier, how organizations provide that support for you. And we want to see whether social isolation can actually increase your stress at work, and whether it would make you feel that you're not happy. So what does the result tell us? So we went to 45 New Zealand organizations that we recruited through the former institute that we are working in AUT in New Zealand, and also the Human Resources Institute of NZ, which is similar to our RE here. So out of that 45 organizations, 28 took part. So there were 804 teleworkers, people who were working not at their workplace. And 47% were female, so half female, and the mean age was 31 years old. Most of them were married or living with a partner, and they were full-time employees. And half of them were non-managerial employees, so rank and file. So this is what we found in our study. if you want to increase your happiness at work in terms of your job satisfaction and your psychological stress, the way to do it is to provide social organizational support for the employees and to give them telework support. That means you allow them to be able to work from home or work anywhere and give them that freedom and flexibility. The dotted line means that there's no effect between telework support and social isolation. On the other hand, social isolation can be reduced if your organization is supportive of telework. And then that would actually reduce your stress and make you happy at work. So in this study, we also look at people conducting telework in different stages. So we actually found that those who are working 8 hours or more telework, they experience more social isolation. So which means if you want to reduce that social isolation, you have to increase support and also giving them that systems and technical support to work from home. So what? So this is the so what here. So for those of us who manage employees, the key question is how do you go about engaging your employees so that they are happy at work? And the way to do that is, as you can see from these two studies, you have to give them a positive organizational support climate. If you can, make sure that they like their bosses, they have good relationship with their boss, they have quality exchange. And another thing is if they're working from home or working anywhere, make sure that there's support for telework so that they don't feel social isolation. Why? Because we as human beings, we are social animals. We want to interact with other people. By working from home, by being an older workers, it's about giving them that ability to interact with other people. So happiness at work, to conclude, should be operationalized with job satisfaction as well as psychological well-being. You should look at 2 dimensions rather than just a single thing. Are you satisfied at work? That's not good enough to be a measurement of happiness. You should look at your stress level as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're also really pleased to have with us tonight Ms. Pearl Proud. Pearl is an ECU alumni. She is currently the clinical lead at Headspace Armadale. She is also an affiliate for the National Trauma Center. Pearl's extensive experience as a clinical supervisor includes coaching individuals, psychologists, and multidisciplinary teams. For the public sector, Pearl has worked with the WA Police and King Edward Memorial Hospital. She has also run a psychology private practice. She is a member of the Institute of Company Directors, a director and chair of Connect Groups, and she also serves on the advisory board of ECU's School and Business and Law's Center for Work and Organizational Performance. Her keen interest in governance has led her to be part of a governance mentorship program with the Office of Multicultural Affairs, Interests, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Institute of Management. Now, Pearl also has interest in arts and philanthropy. She is a founding patron for the Perth Writers Festival, a Medici donor, and a 50th anniversary patron to the Perth International Arts Festival. She was awarded an inaugural National Living Legend Award for making a professional and civic contribution as an African Australian to the broader Australian community. And Mariam tells me that she is a Zulu princess who's been in Australia for 30 years. So please welcome to the podium, Pearl Proud.
Holly, who is that? That's the question I have. I'd like to acknowledge the Lunga Wajak people in WA and the Zulu girls, so we always acknowledge people of place. And acknowledging the ancestors who've been and honor them for their contribution looking after land and current leaders, and then we wish the future leaders well. The task always is there for looking after place. I'm really, really honored to be here. Really, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I'm not good with technology either, Stephen. So we're going to see how we go here. I'm just going to be giving a bit of a perspective. Mine is not research-based, it's not data-based. And it's just a bit of a perspective, and I'll just share some of the insights from how we do things where I am, and some of the observations we've made in the sector, so clinical setting, where I'm based, and also just touch a little bit on the social changes, because we've had, cultural change in workplaces and nature of work and us being in workplaces, and also how workplaces are managed, and some challenges and strategies. So this is something that I thought might be just interesting to set us off, because up to the 90s we had a concept of well-being which I really liked, and then everything has become resilience now. And there's something about the shift in that as well, where we've come from being collectively responsible for something to being quite individual about it. And I always, mindful of these catchphrases that come up, and I'm old enough now to have had different decades of catchphrases and catch cries coming through, and then we have another one. So this was an interesting sort of observation in terms of how we've changed. And particularly about the sort of nurturing thing, because workplaces, as Steve was saying, need to be places of nurture. And also it's a we concept rather than you have to be, resilient, and you have to cultivate this quality, you have to survive things. And the fact that there's something innate and sort of, natural about someone that sets them apart, therefore that they're responsible for. And we touching on psychological safety as well as a way of thinking about the concept that's quite useful in terms of how we think about workplaces at the moment. And I quite like the change that's happened with this aspect, because it's incorporating things psychological. That being my background, I'm quite pleased to see that we're taking a closer look at that. And the whole shift as well in terms of workplaces, we've got a whole industry of safety and health, which has always been about wear the right boot, wear the right helmet. Is that machine going to combust? And now we are starting to incorporate a sense of harm that is actually psychological harm. And we are growing an awareness around that, which is a really good thing, because I think when things are about how we are in places rather than who we are in places, we usually are not getting a whole picture, I think. There's an increased awareness around mental health, as all of us would be aware. It's almost like something that wasn't spoken about before. There was a lot of stigma generally about mental health, but also in workplaces, it was like a non-event, really. You go to work, you do your work, you go home. And now we're starting as a culture and a community to take a closer look at who we are when we're in workplaces. And also starting to be interested in how people are faring when they're at work. And I think most of us would have some challenge, whether it's sort of stress all the way up to higher end psychological or mental health disability or disorders. We're much more likely now to actually talk about those with our family and our friends. We might even say something to our manager about it at work, and that's a really, really good change. And the other thing I was considering is the fact that workplaces are actually just a reflection of how we are as a community and as a society. It's just a microcosm of what's happening overall. So it's a good place to actually have a look to see how we're doing, because we can reflect a lot in terms of what's happening outside the workplace. And this concept of pivoting, that we look inward in terms of workplace, but we can do that and actually take a look at what's happening out there as well. And I think we're going to find a lot of mirroring. And our value set can be that if we are doing well with staff and people that we're looking after at work, those people leave work and go out and be a part of the community, so they're also going to be doing well when they're out in the community. So the place where I work, being a clinical setting, this pivoting aspect is actually quite an important one, because we sit receiving clients who are coming from the community to come and seek support, and we're looking after them. But my emphasis is also to make sure that the people who are looking after clients are actually doing really, really well inside the workplace as well, and it's my job to do that. So there's a, Miriam was like, maybe we can touch on what we do wrong. And I thought these were some of my thoughts around that. that there's been a shift as well in terms of corporations, that we don't make a dollar at the cost of everything anymore. I think most organizations are trying to be civic or social citizens, rather than it being about whether the KPIs, which are just monetary, have been met, and also whether the company is growing and we have economic growth and those measurements. We're actually much more likely now to take a closer look at how people are going, and we sort of measure that as well. So something that's problematic, of course, are companies that might not be putting money and resources into that aspect yet, and not prioritizing the psychological safety, because I think it's going to become less and less likely that our shareholders are not going to be asking those questions. So it's a good thing to consider, and I think when we do that, we're going to be traveling quite well as an organization or a company. And again, the indicators have shifted so that they're not just external, but they're also internal about people in terms of how they are doing. That becomes an important thing for HR, becomes an important thing when we sit on boards and we're considering how the organization is going. It's sort of both, and that's a much more of a balanced situation. This sort of limited skill set, there's something about all of us needing to be a little bit more psychologically minded, I think, that this concept of continuous improvement is not something that's external to us as managing or management, but we also are needing to grow our skill set so that we're able to then better manage people's well-being and be noting their state of mind. And also we need to be agile in terms of being able to respond and have that higher level of responsiveness when we are noting things that might not be going well. So this is an interesting aspect in terms of the fact that we actually spend a lot of our time at work. And someone said at my workplace the other day, I see you more than I see my family. And when you think about it, we actually are at work for an awful lot of time. And so it's important that we, pay attention to how we are at work, because it's almost like a version of the family, really. That we are there, we see those people a lot, and we deal with those people a lot. The concept of a burden of disease is something that I suppose more psychological. It's also epidemiological in terms of assessing. You can do zones, so you can do a city, you can do a country, you can do global burden of disease. People who manage hospitals and who manage policy and funding for health use this indicator a lot. And mental health is a significant aspect of a burden of disease. It's actually the highest one, is higher than physical health. So when the governments are considering their spend, this becomes something that actually chews up the budget a hell of a lot. And so we also therefore can be informed by that in terms of decisions that we might be making, because this is an indicator that's quite important. And also the mental health accounts for 50% of disability for 16 to 24-year-olds. So I'm thinking about the fact that we're actually having a changing workforce. I think Stephen was talking about the fact that there are 5 generations in workplaces now, and we have a much younger people. So this age group where we know through evidence that mental health is a very, very high disability for them, we need to be aware of that. Therefore, we need to shift our workplaces so that we look after millennials, because for them this is a reality, and they are our responsibilities to some extent, because they are typically more junior. Presentation. So again, because in a clinical setting, we get highest across the board of the clinical presentations, which is something that people come with. Anxiety tops everything, and it's consistent, and depression follows. And then we have a range of things that come after that. One of the things that we tend to be quite concerned about is whether there's a suicide ideation or a suicide risk for people that are presenting in mental health services. We want to also see if people are deteriorating to an extent that they might have, let's say, an episode of psychosis. We also want to make sure that they're not carrying something that might not be aware of, so that they might say, I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but that's a subset of something that's actually a disorder and it's quite substantial. But this is actually worth noting, because if in your workplace someone comes and says, I'm anxious, we actually need to take that statement quite seriously. And if someone is coming in and saying they're depressed, we also need to do the same. I just thought I'll mention that because we, as I was saying, we have a shift in terms of our approach, because millennials are living in the age of entitlement. So we actually need to be responding and looking after things for them, because they just expect that. And we have obviously a duty of care in workplaces. I'm racing through this, I know. In terms of just some suggestions that I thought might be useful things to touch on, in terms of what we do then with a changing landscape, with the mental health awareness, with us being committed to reducing psychological harm by tracking psychological risk. Obviously, leadership needs to shape these things. So, most of you are decision makers, you're looking after people, and your mindset in terms of being a leader who's responsive and aware and committed is a good one. And I have a person who's been in the governance space for a very long time, who's now in his early 70s, who says culture is everything and it eats strategy before breakfast. So that's an important aspect to note, that you want to create a culture where mental health is prioritized, and so psychological well-being is looked after, and people are happy to come to work. And at our workplace, which I'll talk about a little bit more now as I go through this, we're very, very committed to a workplace that has cohesion, because we note that teams work best, especially ones that have to look after other people, when there's a level of cohesiveness. So we can go do peer support and peer supervision, as well as obviously supervision, so that people are supported. But if you're supporting something that's actually cohesive, you do a lot better. And one of the things that I commit to staff and also to us clients is our workplace is a safe workplace, which means no one has any psychological injury in my workplace. And when people are joining us, this is one of the things that I note to them, that they are joining a place where there's cohesion, so they're going to be joining a space where they're going to be supported by other people. And I just thought I'd touch on this mental health first aid concept, because it's one way that, if you are in a workplace, you're thinking, how do I raise a level of mental awareness so that people look after one another, you can deliver their training, and people can at least raise their awareness of mental health in the workplace. For us, staff selection is really, really important. We gatekeep really strongly. So we vet people very thoroughly, and we also make sure that we're looking after the well-being of people already in the workplace when someone's coming in. And we are very much for diversity in the workplace. Everybody is different colors, different ages in our team. But if you are psychologically unwell and you are going to be a risk of harm to the people who are already in there, you don't get in. We also just make sure that people who are toxic don't get in. So because we are in that field, we're actually able to note those things. So are totally unapologetic, because people have predispositions to be quite unwell and injure other people. And also, obviously, there are some predispositions that people carry, and so you have to obviously be fair and give people an opportunity to come into work. But if they're going to be a threat, then they might as well go and work somewhere else. And there's that level of commitment. So how committed are you to making sure that people in your workplace are well and they're having their well-being enhanced? And you also want to be accountable to them. So this monitoring bit, I just thought I'd touch on a few indicators. So, in clinical settings, risk is everything. It's almost like there's one word in the Bible, and it's risk. So if you're making sure your clients are not going to take their lives and they're not going to harm, and you track that, you tend to do well. And if you have that as a value set for your clients, for your staff as well, you actually tend to do well. So my job is to make sure that the environment is not risky, psychologically risky for the clients or the staff. And then those all about in terms of what we look at as well. We track those things quite closely. And I also, because our staff are instruments, we don't use instruments, we use instruments. So those things we take a close look at. So how are people appearing in terms of their mood and their affect? And are they anxious, and are they highly aroused, or are they even and coping and functioning well or not? So I do walking management, I float, and I actually observe a lot. I take note of what's happening with people and make sure that people are actually regulated, and because then they're going to be functioning instruments, and then we make sure that in supervision we address that. And if I see something that's not going well such that they can't wait for supervision, then I invite someone in and we have a bit of a chat. Sometimes if people need to find me, because I actually say, just come and find me. Because they also have to monitor risk and they need to flag risk. So I'm making a cup of tea, minding my own business, and someone finds me. So, but it's a good thing because they know they can, and we can have that quick conversation and things can be sorted out. So as a way of finishing up, I was just thinking, we have psychological safety. It's the new thing, but I like the new thing this time. Also, we're a people first organization where I work, and I like to think that that's a value set for most organizations, that we actually put people first. And then the well-being, as I said before, I like that concept better than others because it's something holistic and inside and outside and inside someone. But of course, there's a changing landscape. We're all becoming more aware. We can't deny that we are better informed now. We've got resources we can use. So we need to embrace change and use the things that are available and resources that are available. And it's a mandate for all of us to actually skill psychologically so that we can look after people better. And I was just thinking we were supposed to be talking about work in the future, and I'm thinking, well, that's now. Yeah, thank you very much.
Contributions are fabulous. I wanted to just drill down a little bit more into the teleworking and to try to understand whether there were areas around work and family so that people who had young children at home were either more or less stressed by telework, because we think it's a good idea to allow people who have young children to be teleworking, but it may also cause them more difficulties. And the same with the people in remote areas. Are they moving to teleworking hubs, and is that a good thing for them, or is it not necessarily a good thing? So I'm just looking to see a bit more finer grained detail about the teleworking experience for people. And Pearl, you might have something about it as well in terms of people's mental health and isolation.
Shall I answer the first bit? There's two things I think you've asked us. Thank you for your question. Yeah, good question. One of the things we did measure, but Stephen didn't mention in that particular talk, was work-family conflict. And so what we found was the more of it, the more teleworking you're doing, and we looked at people right up from who were really just at what we call day extenders, doing less than 8 hours, right up to, and then we isolate them, so we didn't include those in the final sample, but from people doing between 1 day and 3 days seem to be reasonably healthy and good with those things. So the work-family conflict wasn't as high, the social isolation wasn't as high. Once they went over that, these things increased and became problematic. So the advice is generally have a mixed sort of model, what we call active working, a bit from home, a bit in the central office where you do collaboration and stuff, and maybe, if you're lucky, a bit in a hub or somewhere like that, one of the digital work hubs where you get that nice collaborative vibe and you don't have to do the travel, but you're still in the work-life environment. But of course it does depend on your home environment, where obviously if you've got young children running around, you don't have a dedicated office, that creates problems. So you've got to have a space and you've got to have boundaries around it, and that's all part of, and the organisation needs to be sure that those conditions are in place. I've got the second bit of the question now.
It's about those who are remote, in remote working.
Yeah, well, one of the things we've been looking at more generally with this sort of thing is, rather than just thinking about telework, thinking more about active working. So in Queensland, they have a program they call Active Work, which is about digital work hub communities. So that can be helping develop the region. So in Perth sense, that might be people living up in the north wouldn't all be driving down to the city every day. They might only come in 1 or 2 days to the central office, thereby saving a lot of space there and the building and all that sort of thing, saving the commute. On another day, they might work in a hub, a regional hub up there, and then they might do a couple of days at home. So the idea is to give you as much autonomy so you work in the place that's best for what the task you're doing. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense.
And also from memory, the data didn't come from the remote side of New Zealand. I think they came from the major cities in New Zealand, so there were more respondents there. So when it comes to the smaller regional cities, there's no statistical significance there by considering those top data.
I don't have a lot to add to that except just to say that one of the things that we assess when we are making sure that we are accounting for elements in someone's functioning comprehensively is to have a look at whether they're isolated or not. Because the question that you're asking about work, adding to people's isolation is a benefit of this, people getting employment, but there's a cost to that in terms of their isolation. It's definitely a marker in how well people do, whether they're depressed or whether they're anxious, let's say they're particular anxiety. And avoidance is one of those major things in terms of when people are anxious. So it could be that when someone is not socially engaged, they're going to do worse, even though obviously, it's part of their work. So part of that would be that you ensure that the person is actually a little bit more visible, a little bit more engaged as a counter to counteract that. Because people can just get getting worse instead of engagement.
One of the things we found in relation to that, that's it's good to get your insights into this, but one of the things we found was that where people did work from home, as long as it wasn't all week, if it was in that hybrid model, 1-3 days, their well-being was better. They did report less stress and better well-being and better performance as well. So we think that it comes down to the support the organisation can give, because when they go through support, both for technical support, but also support from the manager and support from the general organisation, what Steve was talking about really about psychosocial culture. People perform well, and they didn't have the subject, they didn't report the isolation, they didn't report the work-family conflict. So, and they had their stress and better performance. So it seems to me the support's really important. And one of the big things in reading all around this and doing other work subsequently to this is trust. Trust is super important with flexibility. If you have managers that cannot trust people because they can't see them, basically, this is where not only does it stop people working remotely, but where they do work remotely, it also creates all sorts of problems. So you need that trust and support. And I think we're moving into the stage where, city centre real estate is more expensive. Organisations are growing, but they can't afford to grow that there. So, plus they want to do their bit for the environment, and lots of other reasons people want, and also people want to work from home. Young people tend to, but also we find older people want to work from home. Flexibility is more important to them than their pay and a whole lot of other conditions in lots of states. So I say we think as organisations about how we can support those people, and when we do that, they perform better than people who work or we come into the office.
Hi, I'm Melissa Stanton, ECU alumni, and I think you might have answered my question because it was pretty pragmatic about teleworking and that idea of providing support. As an employer, are we obligated to do ergonomic and risk assessments of that space they're choosing?
Their workplace, well, I'll let you comment on the Australian legislation, but the way we treat it in New Zealand, I guess their workplace moves around with them in like a bubble. So wherever they are, but it's the same if you're on the road for purposes of work, not commuting, but other purposes and so on, do need to do that. But it's, one thing I should say, our study found that people work from home reported less health problems, less ergonomics problems, and so on. But clearly they need to have a workstation that's adjustable and suitable. There's no one right posture, by the way. So I'm an ergonomist by background. We always think if people have the great gear, they'll be healthy. That's not true. There's a whole lot of other things like psychosocial that means that they're going to report musculoskeletal or other risks, other problems. But it's having a having a variety of places they can work it seems to be good and healthy. So not necessarily that they have that. But if I was the organisation, I would be saying I need to know that you have a space at home that is dedicated to work, it's quiet, you're not going to be disturbed, and you've got a decent workstation set up. I think that probably is the minimum. But it seems the reality is, even with that, most people will be sitting without a stable, they'll be sitting, you work, that's how we all work at home, you know, that's how I work at home anyway, you know. I don't necessarily put the cricket on in the background, but if I were to, that might improve my well-being. I still get my work done, and you know, that's how it does. At the end of the day, you've got to manage those risks, but here's the thing with working from home. If you manage the outputs rather than the old way of, you know, counting how many hours, bumps on seats, how many hours you're spending at work, and you actually have an outputs-based focus, then people deliver. And so there's a different way of thinking about managing. You know, you need to set goals with people and then give them feedback on their performance, and we know that's very motivating. And it's a different way of managing the people in the office. We're not counting the number of hours they're there, we're actually looking at what they produce. Yeah. But people look after their own work at home. You know, they're in the house a lot anyway. They're safer. There is a liability issue because they're at work, but you know, they're not on the road, they're not travelling, they're not commuting, so there's one that's safe. So it's complicated, and there should be guidance from the government, I'm sure, on those. I talk too much.
Thank you for that. David Lenz from WA Treasury Corporation. This is a personal question. I can't represent my company on that one. I lead a team of quantitative analysts, very quanty people. Occasionally they emerge and speak English. The rest of the time they speak maths. We allow these people to start at 6:30, 5:30 in the morning if they want to, if they can get in at time, or they start at 10 o'clock in the morning and work through late. So some come in early, some come in a little late, which is fine. We have a couple of them that work part-time, and I watched carefully, and I noticed a distinct drop in the level of social interaction and cohesive teamwork that occurs with those people who work 3 days at home or 2 days at home and work 2 days at work. Those people that have been there 7 to 8 years are still part of the team, but I've watched over the last 4 years as they've moved out of the team psychologically, although they're still doing the same work, 2 days in the office, 2 to 3 days at home. Those that joined more recently and never worked full-time in the team like these other ones did, they're almost completely excluded. Either they can't join, they're straight on to 2 to 3 days in the office and the rest of the time out. How do you compensate for that lack of team cohesion? I mean, we try all sorts of things, and it doesn't matter. What happens is you suddenly start going, I will deal with A, B, and C. I don't deal with D, E, and F because I'm never sure when they're here or not. And I noticed this real lack of cohesiveness as opposed to those who come in early or come in late, who they still have 4 or 5 hours of it. And it's all those micro moments every day. Have you got this? Yeah, I've got that stuff. There's this 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5 second micro communication moments. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. Just had a bit of a thing last night. Oh, done. How do you compensate for that in a remote working environment? Because I don't know, and I struggle with it.
Yeah, and you get, you know, I mean, you do. I mean, we're aware of this as a problem. Really, you need to rethink how you're organising work. Rethink the whole thing. It's cultural. A lot of the problems that occur and therefore the barriers to this sort of working come from just mindsets that quite reasonably are associated with traditional ways of working. And it's been going, these same people have worked on it for 7 years. A lot of the problems that come, and I'm not saying that all this is the case in your organisation, well, maybe you've shown, you know, enough insight to suggest to me that it's not, but in a lot of places, for instance, let's take Yahoo, where they recalled all their teleworkers famously to want people teleworking anymore because they weren't collaborating enough because they weren't performing well enough. I say, if that's not working, it's an issue of management. They're not managing telework correctly, and this is because we don't understand it well enough. This is why we produced an industry guide on how to manage telework. And some of it is the choice of who does it, what sort of roles they've got. You've got to get the right mix. So taking sort of socio-technical sort of thinking approach, you've got to have the right, obviously you've got to have the right technology, but you've got to have the right people doing the right sort of tasks. Not too much sort of telework, so the right amount of time. in the right sort of environment, supported by the organisation, and so on. So if you have all those things, it should work. Where you have individuals where it's not working, I would rethink that deployment into flexible working and start thinking about another option, or training whoever is managing them and along with them to get the best out of it. Because it sounds to me like it's a reality that's not going to change. People are going to be, we know increasingly they're going to be working flexibly in the different ways you mentioned. So we just have to get it right. And I don't know what we have to give up some of this team stuff, the collaboration stuff, and so on. Because if you're really sort of talking about you guys, but I find that I can't get any task done that involves concentrating more than 3 or 4 minutes. Because of constant interruptions. When I'm at home, I can. And to lose that would be to lose my ability to be productive. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people. So I think I just think we've got to address that issue, but the how-to comes down to the getting the culture and management really right.
I'm going to add a few things as well. You should look at how the jobs are designed, whether the jobs are interrelated, whether they're task interdependent, or whether they're done separately, whether your quant analyst A and B needs to be talking to each other to get a problem solved, or A does then submit to B, and B does something else and goes to C. So you want to look at that interdependence.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking of before, that if you have roles that are mutually exclusive and independent, like Telework is doing telephone calls and things like that, where each one does the role independently, you can do that kind of stuff. But where you require high degrees of collaboration, and increasingly the workforce should require that level of collaboration, because it's about human intelligence, not about mechanical processing. Right. To the extent that you need to collaborate, I say to everyone on the team, bring your headphones in. Even if you get your headphones on, or your earbuds in, I say, hey, wake up! They're awake, but they're concentrating. Basically, that's the sign, leave me alone. Take your headphones off, that means you're open to production. That's just one of the signals that we've developed. But we find that you don't get all that micro collaboration, and it's like, come on, I'm doing something, all of a sudden, oh, Jeff, what's the, oh, yeah, okay, thanks. And all of a sudden, Michelle comes up, David, yep, got that, it's over there. Those little things don't happen in the telecommunication. And so it's this loss of collaboration, which I call team cohesion, where we're actually sharing ideas constantly coming up and I'll be talking to Michelle, and all of a sudden somebody else will say to me, oh David, I just heard you say blah, 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 blah. You should try that. It's in the file of the Department of Mines.
Which you can't do through technology. I mean, the Telework's often sold on, technology can bridge that gap, especially as it's got much better now. But you don't get that micro.
And that's no solution. I'm trying to stop it. The team, the individuals are good. They love it. But if I look at the actual productivity of the team, it's definitely dropped. Now, if my PhD guy says I need to spend tomorrow at home and spend the whole day, go. So if it's like every now and again, it works beautifully. But when it becomes in the office 2 days and away for 3, we really lose a lot of productivity. And there's a lot of micro jobs that don't even give out to those people. That's what I'm struggling with from a supervisor's perspective.
Let's get the balance right. Every organisation is different, and like Stephen was saying, the nature of the task and the interdependency and so on.
Well, it's the social relations. When you're talking about teamwork and collaboration, especially in the future of work, that social dimensions, the things that Kerry does a lot of research on collaboration and networks, you need that. By working from home, you're losing that social dimensions of work. So, and I think that's a quite critical component when you're teleworking, is you're losing that connection to other people around you.
When I get the big screen, that automatically recognises when I look up at Michelle, or I look down at Peter, or I look over it activates that. So when I talk, Peter gets it, not Michelle.
Oh, yeah.
When I get the technology so that I'm acting, Peter, have you got this? You got Michelle, have you got that? It would work then.
You can certainly do that in meetings. I mean, those systems are there, those telepresence ones, I use them. It's a good point. The other thing is maybe you're losing the productivity of, I don't know what commutes are in Perth now. Is that the outer end?
I don't lose that productivity. Because if they're not doing that, they're doing the horses.
We have a little group chat going on the side of the computer, and some of my teams and our working teams as well. Some of them work at home in academics and work at different campuses, and we chat all day.
WeChat.
Some type of chatting going on. We have time for another question.
Hi there, Amanda Kirkwood, Manager of Workplace and Wellbeing at Woodside. Just had a question about some of the data that you have on, particularly around, you talked about what a healthy workplace looks like, and there was two key elements, one around sort of your interaction with your manager, and the other more around the organisational support.
Yes.
Do you have any concept of which has more influence, or whether there's one that's more important than the other?
Yeah, depending on which study. If you're talking, if I'm trying to remember correctly, if you're referring to the telework, to the discrimination study, age discrimination, then the important one is your support. So it's about creating that workplace culture that support having older workers in the workplace. So that one has a stronger effect and more significant on older workers not feeling that they've been discriminated at work. On the other hand, going back to the telework study, I'm just trying to remember.
That was POS as well. So
yes.
The perceived organisational support has been shown to be very powerful in lots of studies.
Yeah.
And Stephen's more of he introduced me the concept of it, and it's sort of married up with a lot of things I've been looking at. But and it's about creating that culture. But the way it works, just like the other one, the leader member one, which is the other one you referred to, they both work off the same principle, and that of reciprocity. And that basically means if you perceive, well, it means give and take. So if you perceive, for instance, your organisation cares about your well-being, you will return that with, let's say, engagement or retention or whatever it is, with performance. And that's how it works. And the leader member exchange works in a similar way. They both use that sort of rule of reciprocity. It's common sense in a way if you look up here. The leader member exchange is a bit of a different theoretical, big group, out group stuff and so on.
That's right. So it depends on the personality of your manager as well, and yourself, whether you can click. So there's more of a give and take, a bit of I do something for you now and you do something for me. That sort of thinking.
But it's both reciprocity, and it does make sense if you think about it, and you want to engage and have productive work. And incidentally, giving flexible work opportunities is one of those forms of visual turning group. One of the explanations that often used to explain the better performance of teleworkers, notwithstanding some.
But in terms of social support, I found it's not just in the older workers, it's in stress, in organizational change. Support is key. 2 weeks ago I did a presentation looking at workplace bullying. It's that social support that gives the employee the autonomy to do what they are employed to do. That's the primary determinant in terms of reducing stress.
And the other one is that we didn't mention today is there's various ways that we measure this and talk about this, but basically is psychosocial safety, climate or culture and developing that. So that's about having top management commitment, communicating to psychological health and safety, communicating really well to the organisation, having ways to report problems you've got, all those sorts of things, having involvement of workers in health and safety and so on. Those things will also create really good, much better outcomes and it's been shown in lots of studies. So, the culture really.
I know I said no more, but then my boss likes the question.
We have to move ahead.
The boys are talking too much, so I'm going to ask a question of the girl. Questions for Pearl. So one of my areas of research interest has been work intensification. Much of it in the public sector background, and I see some ex-colleagues here, Amanda and Daniela. Good to see you. In your years of practice, have you seen any change in the reasons why people are coming to see you? Is there more issues emanating from the workplace and this intensification of having to do more with less? I don't know if that's a loaded question. You don't have to say yes. I'm just interested.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that there was something specific about intensification. But one of the things, as I was saying earlier, whatever the reason why people might present somewhere to seek support, what's changed is the fact that people do a lot more than they used to. There are different reasons why. What's really interesting, actually, just to then touch on something that you said earlier about what do you do with lack of cohesion in the workplace. It's relating to your question as well, actually. There's something about cultivating a culture where people want to come to work, where people are invested and connected to others. And part of what you do is to foster those connections and that accountability to the others. So if someone is working part-time, part of scheduling is the fact that you want to set it as being imperative that there's going to be a crossover where everybody's there. Also, you start from that common base and then people can go off and do other things, but they need to come back to base. And there are a few things that you can do to actually generate that level of cohesion and accountability to others. People tend to do better when they have that set up for them, because then they become invested, but also it's a way of you conveying that you care about them, and then you galvanize them to actually support one another and be accountable to one another. So the mindset shifts, which means that even when someone is not at work, they actually have their workplace and their work colleagues in mind, and they might even reach out on the phone or check in or whatever. But when they come back in, they actually account for the time they haven't been there by making sure that they're actively checking with their colleagues, because they see it as their job to do that. So that's one of the things that we tend to do at my workplace, that we can look at people part-time, people full-time, but there's a level of accountability that we set up where everybody then buys in. So, when those type of things are not there in your workplace, you tend to then struggle, and, whether the quality of work is harder, whether the demands of the work are harder, but the antidote, besides going maybe and seeing a psychologist or getting support with psychological, the antidote in the workplace is to make sure that you are connected and supported, and your well-being is prioritized in the workplace.